From Software is a Japanese development studio known for making some of the most challenging and creative games on the market. Though they became popular with the release of Dark Souls, they've actually had a long history of video game development that began in the early days of the PlayStation, though they're actually even older than that. Originally founded on November 1st, 1986, they weren't focused on video games in those days, but office productivity software. That's right, the makers of Dark Souls were basically helping Bill Lumbergh from Office Space torture people with TPS reports.
Hello, Peter. What's happening?
This might actually explain some of the later NPC dialogue the Soulsborne games became known for. Depressed and insane mutterings by characters who slowly morph into hollow, empty husks trapped in a dismal cloud of gloom, decay, and perpetual misery that they can never escape. You know, exactly how every office worker feels all the time. FromSoft didn't start to shift away from productivity software until 1992, when they learned about the upcoming launch of Sony's first video game console. Instead of using cartridges, which most of the other video game companies were doing at the time, the PlayStation would use compact discs. And since FromSoft were already using discs to distribute their productivity software, it wouldn't take a huge investment to move over to making video games. Their first game, Kingsfield, a medieval-themed first-person role-playing game, launched on December 16, 1994, 13 days after the PlayStation console went on sale in Japan. In Kingsfield, you play as Jean Alfred Forrester, a prince trying desperately to find his father, who went missing in an underground graveyard. While the first Kingsfield game never made it outside Japan, it was still met with critical acclaim by the local gaming community, resulting in a sequel, Kingsfield 2, which was eventually brought over to the international market. Though Kingsfield never reached the popularity that the Souls games eventually did, it featured a lot of similar gameplay elements, such as a high degree of difficulty, a small amount of NPC characters, washed out dull colors, and an emphasis on combat rather than story. A lot of the games FromSoftware would go on to make would follow this exact formula, even though many video game reviewers would claim these issues were big problems for the series. FromSoftware followed Kingsfield 2 up with Kingsfield 3, which again got an international release, but was called Kingsfield 2 in America. On July 10, 1997, FromSoftware released Armored Core, the title that would take the company to moderate success and notoriety. In Armored Core, you play as a mech pilot who becomes a member of the Ravens, a mercenary group contracted by enormous corporations who began to dominate the world. Reviewers gave Armored Core pretty high marks for the fast-paced combat and mech customization, but it was criticized for its lack of cohesive story. Aside from customizing your mech, which admittedly was freaking awesome, there wasn't much of an incentive to play. Still, Armored Core became a well-known and popular franchise that would enable FromSoftware to continue making the games they wanted. Shadow Tower, released in 1998, was Kingsfield, except in a tower. It was made to be an entirely new IP for the company, but it was the same game just wearing different clothes. King's Tower Field was a first-person dungeon crawler that allowed players to venture into the aptly named Shadow Tower to kill demons in order to save the town from evil. Despite being a remake of an earlier game just wearing a different hat, Shadow Tower introduced some unique concepts that would go on to become staples in the Soulsborne series. Each piece of equipment your character wears has a durability rating. When an item is damaged or broken, it needs to either be repaired or replaced. Shadow Tower also introduced a mechanic where you could block with your shield, whereas in Kingsfield, the shield was an item that added to your overall defense, but you couldn't use it to block. Other games did it first, but it seemed like with each iteration of the action-adventure genre, FromSoftware kept getting closer and closer to the formula it would use for later Souls games. Echo Knight was a first-person survival horror game released in North America on August 30th, 1999. It's a really odd game. You play as Richard Osman, who, thanks to magical objects found in his deceased father's house, is transported to the past to relive events. His mission in the past is to find out what happened to a ship called the Orpheus, which disappeared at sea and was never found. At first I thought it was a puzzle game, until a floating evil ghost girl picked me up and started tossing me around like a rag doll. The game features no real weapons, but a mechanic where you need to switch on lights in order to escape harm. It also featured 4 different endings based upon choices you end up making during the game. It was really bizarre, and by the pretty mixed reviews it received, I'm not the only one who thought so. Echo Knight would get a sequel titled Echo Knight 2: The Lords of Nightmares, which wouldn't be released outside of Japan. While Echo Knight didn't go on to sell very many copies, From Software gained a bit of experience in creating horror elements in their games. It also brought the idea of multiple endings to a story into From Software's wheelhouse, which proved to be invaluable for future games. As the launch for the PlayStation 2 was steadily approaching, From Software wanted to update their games catalog with new IPs. This resulted in Eternal Ring, which came out on October 24th, 2000, a few days prior to the PlayStation 2's official North American launch. In Eternal Ring, you control Kane Morgan, a magician sent to investigate the island of no return. Eternal Ring had some pretty mixed reviews. Some praised the graphics and the story, and others realized From Software once again remade Kingsfield, except with improved graphics and more magic. Then came Evergrace. Oh boy, what a complete pile of shit. Somehow this found its way out of Japan and got an American release on October 26, 2000. Then it got a European release on March 30th, 2001. From Software intended for this game to be a PlayStation release, but it proved too ambitious for the console and they had to remake the game from scratch on the PS2. In Evergrace, you play as Darius, a swordsman, or Charlene, a homemaker, with 2 very different storylines and ways to fight. In it, you explore the Rubane Empire and attempt to discover the mystery of the Crest, a series of markings that some people believe conjure misfortune for the branded. The American release saw some incredibly sad voice acting for the Darius storyline, and just the worst soundtrack imaginable. Just listen to this shit.
I know, it's magical. Right out of a fairy tale. It'll make me 100 times stronger.
Yep. Let's just find the option menu and turn that down. So much better. To my knowledge, they never made a sequel to Evergrace, and we can all thank whatever god is out there that stopped it from happening. Luckily, FromSoft was about to redeem themselves by releasing one of the best mech games of all time a few months later. Armored Core 2 came out on August 3rd, 2000, and despite not boasting any DualShock support for the PS2, it still managed to be one of the better games From Software ever produced. It was fast, it was customizable, it had a lot of varied missions and a fun multiplayer that usually turned into one-on-one sword-arm deathmatches. Apparently the world agreed because Armored Core scored pretty highly across the grid with game reviewers, who praised the graphics and the responsive gameplay. They followed Armored Core 2 up with the most laughably lighthearted game From Software has ever made. Let me remind everyone real quick that this is what the company went on to make. But they also made this. The Adventures of Cookie and Cream followed the story of 2 bunnies named Cookie and Cream who venture out into the world to find the Moon Festival. It's one of the most light-hearted and yet entertaining games I've ever played. You control both bunnies at the same time using the 2 analog sticks, and you have to solve environmental puzzles on both sides of the screen to complete the level. To create steps for Cream, you have to use Cookie. If you don't cross the goal line with both bunnies, you can't finish the stage. The best part is, each stage has a timer, and in order to get more time to complete the stage, you need to grab all the silver and golden clocks you can while you solve the puzzles. It was a very unique game, and it received a lot of positive reception, almost as much as Armored Core 2. It was eventually remade for the 3DS. I highly recommend you check it out, especially if you've ever played Ni no Kuni. When Armored Core Last Raven was released in 2004, a new face had arrived at From Software and would change the course of the company forever. Hidetaka Miyazaki was 29 years old when he joined From Software. After playing Ico in 2001, Miyazaki began to think more and more about what he wanted out of his life and out of his career, so he applied to From Software in order to work on video game design. His passion quickly elevated him to the position of project manager for Lost Raven, and then to the position of director for Armored Core 4, and its sequel, Armored Core: For Answer, in just 1 year. FromSoft was in the process of creating an entirely new IP when Armored Core 4 wrapped up. Only they decided to scrap the project entirely and recycle the assets in another game. Miyazaki approached company leadership to use the failed project in order to make a new game, and they agreed. If he failed, no big deal. There was no expectations for it to be good, but if it succeeded, he could carve out a new role for himself doing exactly what he wanted to do. Demon's Souls was the result of that failed project. Although it had a spectacularly bad showing at the 2009 Tokyo Gamescom, sales soon began to pick up after release, though it did so very slowly as word of mouth spread around Japan about the game's difficulty and unique, fast-paced combat. Sony refused to publish the title internationally, but Atlus picked up distribution rights. Demon's Souls spread across the world, readying players for the future. To say that Dark Souls put From Software on the map as a game development company would be a massive understatement. Released for PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 in 2011, Dark Souls created an entire genre of Souls-like titles that attempted to replicate its wild success. Dark Souls shipped over 13 million copies worldwide and holds the record of being the most sold game on launch day for Bandai Namco. Dark Souls cemented Miyazaki's career at From Software, propelling him into widespread fame for his role in creating the game, proving to everyone that his ideas about where to take the action-adventure genre were right on target. Work soon began on a follow-up title, but Miyazaki would not be taking charge of the new project, much to the dismay of many die-hard fans. Instead, Dark Souls 2 would be led by Tomohiro Shibuya and Yui Tanamura, with Miyazaki acting in a supervisory role. Dark Souls 2 met an incredible amount of success, despite not having Miyazaki at the helm to direct the game, and went on to ship over 2.5 million units worldwide. Though if you ask a Souls fan what their favorite game in the series is, they're not likely to say Dark Souls 2. To many players, it was a step back from the original that failed to capture some of the magic, but for others, it was the proper step into a new sequel. Bloodborne released on March 24th, 2015. Miyazaki had been a huge admirer of H.P. Lovecraft, Bram Stoker, and oddly enough, even George R.R. Martin. The Bloodborne team traveled to Romania and the Czech Republic before developing the game, soaking in the architecture heavily featured in the setting to Bram Stoker's novels, specifically Dracula. The plot of Bloodborne was largely inspired by the collected works of H.P. Lovecraft, who wrote at length about the Great Old Ones, powerful deities from space who rest in a death-like sleep on the Earth. The game received critical acclaim, like all those in the Souls series. It is almost unanimously agreed upon that Bloodborne is a gaming masterpiece. To further cement that claim, Bloodborne also received one of the best DLCs of the Soulsborne series, in my opinion, The Old Hunters. Dark Souls 3 released worldwide on April 12, 2016, and is the last of the series with Miyazaki in the seat of game director. In Dark Souls 3, you play as the Ashen One, who is sent on a very impossible task: return the Lords of Cinder to their thrones. It was the first of the Souls game to return back to Anor Londo, Firelink Shrine, and some of the set pieces from the original games. It ended up receiving 2 DLC expansions, Ashes of Ariandel and The Ring City, which didn't answer any questions in terms of story, like many fans had expected, but gave a few more good moments with the series before it ended. After release, Miyazaki said that Dark Souls 3 would mark a turning point for both the games and the company, as his role inside the studio changed from game developer to president of From Software Inc. Hidetaki Miyazaki certainly turned From Software around. As evident by the history of the company, we saw many games in the course of this video that had very good ideas, but failed in how they were executed, receiving only moderate success. With Miyazaki at the helm, the stage is set for From Software to advance as a company and as a game development studio. In 31 years, From Software changed from making office productivity software to attaining the title of one of the most influential video game developers of our time. Personally, I can't wait to see where we go from here, and I can't wait to see what From Software brings us next.